The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. And that is what we have been doing for these more or less 7 days, is working very hard to realize the truth and to embody it. Because, as you've heard so many times, just having a Kensho experience, or 2 or 3, is not sufficient unless, well, it's not even sufficient at 2 or 3. But an aspect of practice that is often forgotten in the West is what's called the long maturation. And it is vital. There's no point in practicing if we're not working to not only open to a deeper reality, a clearer reality, the truth, but we're also working to let go of our dysfunctional habit patterns that we've outgrown, basically. Many times as children, most of the time as children, really, we develop habit patterns of activity, of reactivity, really, in response to conditioning. Things people say to us, things people do to us. We then develop a protective layer because it hurts. And who wants to feel pain? And so we grow, and that works for a while, and eventually it becomes an albatross around our neck because we find ourselves as adults not needing so much those childhood compensations anymore, and yet they're still stuck. We're still stuck with them because we haven't paid enough attention. We haven't checked them out. And in many cases, they're even unconscious because we've ingrained them in our being so long. They're an automatic reaction. And those automatic reactions cause pain and suffering. So it's important. We have this incredible gift of a practice that really can liberate us, but we have to be the liberators. It's not going to happen automatically. And yes, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 Kensho experiences are going to give us insight into our behavior and offer us the opportunity to see it more clearly. And when we can see it more clearly, that's when we can own it, embody it, in the sense of allowing ourselves to feel it in our bodies, this uncomfortable energy that we tried to shut down because it was so uncomfortable. And in that way, it weakens the response. And physiologically, each time we don't go where we would automatically go in our mind or our behavior, it weakens the brain connections that would make that habit live. So again, it's absolutely a vital aspect of our practice to not just reach deep, truly deep, and deeper and deeper and deeper, increasing clarity, opening more and more to this increasing clarity, but also with that clarity, with what we realize here and there, those Dharma gates that were talked about yesterday, to walk through them, to take up their offer, to make lasting change and free us more. So today is a very big day, a day we've been working up towards all these days of this sesshin so far. And there's the opportunity, of course, there's that opportunity every night, but particularly this night, because we'll have a little bit of extra rest period before golden hour this evening to allow us to refresh ourselves and kind of really bring up the energy to just do it. to sit all night long, deepening, 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 deepening. It's cold out, it's winter. So as we begin to fall asleep in the zendo, then we can get up and we can take a walk outdoors. Refreshed, we return to the zendo with renewed depth and energy and take it some more hours. Of course, if you need to go to sleep, that's an option also. But tonight is the really most appropriate night to push the envelope. And in many Rohatsu Sesshin, it's required that people stay up all night. But as you've heard all throughout this week, we do what works for us, and we do what works for us based on the discernment that comes from our hara, our tanden, not our ideas coming from our heads. Those don't work. Those are applications that really are better used for building bridges or designing software or creating whatever we are creating in our jobs. To live from our hara is not only quite fulfilling, but it always, if we really truly encounter our hara and live from our hara, and that doesn't mean having an idea that we're focused here, but to experience moving from our belly, living from our belly. And then when we hear that voiceless, still, small voice, and it's authentic, it's not an idea of that voice, then when we move in that direction, it always works in my experience. And it's amazing the miracles that can happen as a result. We'll continue sharing Hakuin's Rohatsu exhortations, this for the 7th night. The master said, when a child leaves home to become a monk, it is said his family members for the next 9 generations are reborn into a deva existence. He must be a genuine monk, though, one of those in whom a great burning vow to save all beings wells up from within, firing him with fierce courage to go forward and sever the roots to life, so the true Dharma nature appears suddenly before his eyes. Such a person is an authentic monk. For his family, rebirth in the Deva realms is no empty saying. It will become a joyous reality. And, that's an interesting way to put it. Psychologically, the more let go we are, the more beneficial it is to not only our family, but to everyone we encounter. Because the energy of let-go-ness, the energy of clarity, the energy that allows our innate wisdom and compassion to rise and be expressed fully, that comes through deep practice, that energy expresses itself throughout the universe. Let me tell you about a mother who, from the province of Harima. On the night she conceived, she vowed that if she should give birth to a son, she would give him to the priesthood. That same night, an old man appeared to her in a dream and said, I'm an ancestor of yours, born 9 generations ago. When I died, I entered the world of the dead, where I've been undergoing endless suffering. But on the strength of the wonderful vow you just made, I will finally be able to escape the torments of hell. There was a priest named Ryozan who lived in the province of Kai and engaged in the training of monks. One night, as the assembly was doing zazen during Rohatsu Sesshin, the spirit of his dead mother suddenly appeared to him. Grasping a sword in her hand, she rushed at him and stabbed him in the side. Emitting a loud roar, he toppled over as if dead, vomiting blood, and did not regain consciousness for a long time. The next day he bid farewell to his monks and set out on a pilgrimage. He carried nothing but 3 robes and a begging bowl, and slept out in the open, exposed to the elements. He wandered for years, going from teacher to teacher in his pursuit of the way. His jhana, his meditation, attained an exceptional depth of maturity. One day, as he was about to enter samadhi, his mother appeared again. When he raised his eyes to see her, she vanished. Later she appeared again, when he was deeply immersed in a samadhi as vast and tranquil as the great ocean. This time she spoke. After I died and descended into the world of the dead, the demon lictors all treated me with great respect as the mother of a monk. I experienced no suffering or torment at all. Then, alas, you began to make a name for yourself as a teacher. The lictors all began to say, "We thought she was the mother of a priest, but it turned out she had spawned a scoundrel." They began to inflict terrible suffering on me, iron bars, heavy iron shackles. I grew to hate you with such a passion, such a bitterness. It seemed to penetrate my very bones. That is why I came and stabbed you that night. You had a change of heart and left the temple, set out on pilgrimage. When I visited you the next time, I saw immediately that thoughts of birth and death still lingered in your mind, so I disappeared. But now there's an almost transparent clarity to your meditation and prajna wisdom. My suffering has also ended. I can now be reborn into the Deva realms. This time I've come to thank you. You heard what that woman said, didn't you? All of you have mothers of your own. You have brothers and sisters and grandparents and relatives of various kinds. If you counted up all the ancestors who lived before you, their number would reach into the tens of millions. Well, at this very moment, they are confined within the cycle of birth and death, undergoing interminable, unspeakable torment. This is Hakuin. It would be hard to imagine their eagerness for you to break through and attain the way. They are like people in the midst of a parching drought, scanning the skies for signs of rain. If you just sit there doing zazen, going through the motions because you haven't brought forth the great bodhisattva vow, how can you bear to look them in the face? Time waits for no one. You can't let a single hour pass in vain. Strive hard, strive hard. We all came to practice through some need to go beyond what we normally experience, what we normally know, what we normally feel. But as we continue to practice, sometimes our habit patterns begin to raise their ugly heads. And also there is that other factor of, even in the midst of discomfort in this life, the familiarity of our life as we're living it now is more comforting than daring to go into the unknown naked, which is required basically to do truly deep practice. We have to let go who we think we are. And that can be a frightening proposition. I have a friend who, in the Sechín in Mexico, where she broke through, later she said to me, I honestly thought I was dying, physically dying. And of course, there's Ramana Maharshi as well, who had that sudden fear of death. And instead of trying to escape it through whatever means he could, involvement in entertaining activities, instead he really took a deep look at it. Thought, okay, I'm so afraid of death, let's take a look and see what death really means. And he lay down on the floor. And he imagined his body becoming cold. He tried holding his breath to feel like how it would be if he were not breathing anymore. And there's no real record of how long he was involved in this exploration, But what came of it is a profound understanding of life and death, and an immense freedom that lasted his entire life. And he died an old man of cancer with a multitude of followers surrounding him. This dying, what does it mean? What does it really mean? We sense that there is this liberation of some level, at least. There is this freedom. There is something worth reaching for. But then it gets a little scary. Walk into that fear just like Ramana Maharshi did. It's amazing what can happen when we allow ourselves to feel the whole catastrophe. Countless human beings for centuries before us have done this and thrived and been liberated from their old habit patterns and their conditioning, and particularly from their self-images. Because once we have a greatly weakened self-image, or if we've actually let it go completely, which is exceedingly rare, we can do that for a few moments, but to do it lastingly, well, Ramana Maharshi did. The Buddha obviously did. Other people did. Flora Courtois, an American woman who was so caught up in her quest for a deep underlying truth that was always true, and had a deep awakening when she was a college student at the University of Michigan in her second year, I think it was, of school. She'd been searching for that answer since she was a young teenager. And back then, this was the early 1930s, nobody knew much about Zen. And so there wasn't anybody who could tell her what the heck had happened. She just knew that her life was transformed. She was free in ways that she hadn't ever even thought she could be. And eventually she she was headed for a PhD in psychology. She shortened it to a master's degree after her Kensho experience, because that seemed like that was the best thing, and worked in psychology, worked in clinical work for many years. She married, she had a son, and it wasn't until 20 years after that initial experience, which testifies to the depth of it, that she encountered Mitra-roshi, told him the story through Miyazumi-roshi's translating, and Mitra-roshi stated that it was so clear to him that that Kensho experience was so deep and still so alive for her, and she was still functioning from it, that he didn't feel the need to test her. And she went on to train with Miyazumi-roshi, completed the whole koan curriculum with him. He asked her to teach, which she declined. I met her, she was in her early 70s. I think she might have been just 70 when I met her in Santa Barbara, California. I had had some correspondence with her because the Rochester Zen Center had a copy of a book, little book by Quest Books, long out of print, called An Experience of Enlightenment, which was what she had written at Mitra-roshi's request about the experience she had in her life from then on. Well, not so much her life from then on, but that experience and how it transformed her life, let's put it that way. And the book was out of print. It was an enormous inspiration to me in my early years of practice, and I share it sometimes here in Teisho as well, because it is still deeply inspiring practice to emulate, to know about. An American woman, a college student, with no training in Zen. She hadn't even heard of Zen. nor had anyone who she encountered. She tried to find out what the heck had happened and finally quit talking about it and resolved not to say another word about it until she met somebody who could understand. And so that happened finally when she met Mitra-roshi. She had already met Alan Watts and was part of his little living room group where they discussed Zen. And she began to realize that this thing called enlightenment that they were talking about was what had happened to her. And somehow she ended up connecting with Mayuzumi, who was sensei back then and sitting in the basement of a church long before ZCLA came into being. And it was through Mayuzumi Roshi's request that she drives some visiting priests up to Tassajara that she met Mitra-roshi and decided to speak with him. She was so deeply engrossed in that question that it was a little challenging for her in college, actually. One point, she had some level of insight in the middle of a class where she was sitting front and center in front of the visiting lecturer from Britain. And something happened. She must have had such a surprised look on her face that he stopped his lecture mid-sentence and peered at her to see what on earth was going on with this woman. We take those kinds of risks as we do our practice, and part of us does not want to look like a fool, ever, because most likely we've been chastised for that, or we've certainly been warned about that. But we have to take risks. There is a true story that is pertinent here. There was a group of friends who were river running in canoes, running through rapids in this particular river. And in the midst of one rapid, one of the people's canoes tipped over and he disappeared. His friends walked the banks of the river for 4 hours searching for him. And finally, he popped out of the water right where he'd gone under. It turns out that those hours where they were hunting for him were spent inside a hollow rock that he had been sucked into through the power of the river. And it was big enough inside that he could sit there. And after a certain point, he realized he was getting cold. And then he realized that the air in that hollow rock was finite because it was surrounded by water. It was sealed by water. The opening was underwater. And that if he stayed there, he would die. It's a real metaphor for us. If we stay in our comfort zone, we will fail to open to the amazingness of real life with a capital L. And he could see this circle of light at his feet and realized that must be the opening. He didn't know whether or not the river current would push him back in if he tried to get out. But he had to try. It was that or die inside that hollow rock. And so he did try, gave everything to it, and popped through the opening out of the water. We live encrusted in habit patterns and conditioning, protective layer against the world. And yet those people who have had deep awakening experiences find no risk at living open, clear, and present. Truly open, clear, and present, not defended. There's no need to defend. If you've seen deeply enough, there is no need to defend. Who is there to defend? Flora Catois was an amazing woman. Clear, bright, lovely, and very human. I stayed with her several times in her house. She had asthma and had to do some lung management every morning, so she wasn't up and about really early. There were a couple of hours where she had to deal with her health, and eventually she died of pneumonia several years later. But she died clearly, let go, no problems. There are many people, ordinary people in the world, that have had these kinds of experiences deeply enough. And this is the point too. We can have a kensho, we can have 2, 3, 4, 5 kenshos, more. And each one gives us a deeper insight into reality, and we let go a little bit more each time. But Hakuin had 19 major kenshos before his final kensho was the one where he finally felt truly liberated. The question is, do we want to settle for half or a quarter or a tenth of what we could open to that is our life, that is who we really are? Or do we want to live in a protective straitjacket? It's up to us. And we've done a lot of work so far in this sesshin. You can take that final leap into at least a single kensho or a next level kensho. You can do it. I have no doubt. All that is needed is great determination and faith that you can do it. And I can tell you this about faith. All the years, or the early years, I should say, that I was at the Rochester Zen Center, I was really anxious that there would be a massive secret revealed, and that would be that I had no faith. I knew I was stubborn. That's about the only thing of the 3 factors that are vital to Zen practice that I had. I didn't know about what this doubt thing was. That's an awkward term for it. Really, it's more about perplexity or a sense that there is something beyond that you need to get back to. But faith that I could accomplish this, forget it. Well, 1974, January 1st, I sat down for the first time and crossed my legs out of great anguish. And I'm still doing it. So there must be some faith somewhere. I leave you with this and echo Hakuin. Strive hard, strive hard. You've come so far in this sesshin. You can take it over the next step. And you will find it's worth it. We have to push ourselves through barriers, or I should say meet barriers and dare to overcome them. That's life, but it's particularly effective in practice, where we just trust that if we keep going and really put ourselves into every moment as deeply as we can, it will be worth it, because it will. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.